Well, welcome to a deeper dig of the Small Farmers Winter Webinar Series. These bonus episodes are meant to continue each week's webinar topic in conversation with the members of the Local Foods and Small Farms team, Commercial Ag, and that week's presenter. In this informal chat, we'll talk about that week's topic, answer any lingering questions from our chat box, and hear more from our speaker. I'm Grant McCarty, Local Foods and Small Farms Educator for Drew Davis, Stevenson, and Winnebago counties. I'm joined by Katie Bell, Local Foods and Small Farms Educator for Franklin, Jackson, Perry, Randolph, and Williamson counties. Hi, Katie. How are you this afternoon?
Doing good. It looks like it's starting to rain down here, so we're kind of losing some of our warm weather that we had earlier in the week.
Oh, I really hate that from a Northern Illinois perspective. Next, we're joined by Nathan Johanning, a commercial agriculture educator from Madison, Monroe, and St. Clair counties. How are you doing today, Nathan?
Doing good. Likewise, it's getting a little chillier down here, so it's no longer 80 degrees anymore. So
it is such a shame. Yet again, I hate that.
Yeah, I do think we did get pretty darn close to 80 this week. I don't actually remember if we broke it, but it was pretty close.
Yeah. We've had a week of sun and we've been in the 60s in Northern Illinois. So we got a taste of it, I guess, if you will. And finally, we're joined by Bronwyn Aly, Local Foods and Small Farms Educator for Gallatin, Hamilton, Hardin, Pope, Saline, and White counties, who was our presenter on high tunnel winter greens. Hi, Bronwyn. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so chilly today that we're down to 60. I've had to put on my sweatshirt back up because I had already acclimated to that 75 to 80 degree day. So
breaking out the shorts, hanging out in the high tunnels.
Yeah, now I'm back to sweatshirt, coveralls.
So you're a couple weeks out from high tunnel presentation. How are you feeling about it? Lots of good questions, emails you've received from it too?
Yeah, I've gotten a few inquiries from the presentation, and I think hopefully we'll be able to help a few folks get started and think about winter greens production as a way to utilize their tunnel in the fall or winter off season, so to speak. So yeah.
So what are you currently working on in the high tunnel right now?
Well, we are getting ready to plant our early season, what I call early season tomatoes and peppers mainly. So we still have a little bit of work to do on the high tunnels as far as some reskinning, and we were reworking some of our side curtains on a couple of the tunnels. So we're getting those systems in place. We are currently working on tilling and incorporating some new compost into the raised beds in those tunnels. We're hoping to have all of that completed and anticipating transplanting the first week of April.
Wow. Okay. So that's coming soon.
Yes, we have some really busy next couple of weeks getting ready to happen. Yeah.
So I have some experience with high tunnels, but Nathan and Katie, do you have much experience in growing in high tunnels?
Yeah, I've had quite a bit. Of course, I helped for quite a while. I helped Bronwyn, and even prior to Bronwyn a little bit, some stuff down at Dixon Springs. I just had experience, and lots of knowledge imparted to me from Dixon Springs. And then we have a small high tunnel at the Murphysboro office when I worked out there. Now Katie has the experience to work in. So that's, unfortunately, I don't have my own high tunnel at my disposal right at the moment, but I'm stuck to low tunnels and other rudimentary things that are at my disposal. But yeah, I was down there for 6 years or so, and we had the high tunnel down there. It was built basically from scratch when I first started. So I've kind of seen it from basically construction on up, and kind of logistics and other things. So
yeah, my high tunnel experience came from these two. My first summer as an intern, kind of as I've mentioned before, I worked here at the Murphysboro office in the smaller high tunnel with Nathan, and then also did field work. So that was really my first introduction to high tunnels. And then the next summer was like a crash course in everything in high tunnel production and like more on a larger scale. And you know, I never want to see another high tunnel cucumber as long as I live.
I thought you were going to say high tunnel, and I was like, I think you're stuck with the high tunnel, Katie.
Yeah. No, I'll work in the high tunnel, but I just don't want to have to prune and lower cucumbers to the level that we did.
You're welcome. I'm glad that you enjoyed that project. So,
and Katie was also still on board as an intern the first year of this Winter Greens research project. So
Yeah.
Katie got all of the experience of from planting all the way through to harvesting through the whole season. So that was a good experience for her in her internship. So
yeah,
glad to be able to provide that for you, Katie.
Thank you. And in that particular tunnel, which is the one in the picture that I also helped build, we redid those raised beds in that tunnel too. And so I helped with that. So I got to see it pretty much all the way through the whole process of putting in those beds to all the way to the winter greens and things. And so that was a really great, like I said, kind of an intensive crash course in all things high tunnels.
Well, because I mean, looking at, you know, the high tunnels that you have brought with those raised beds, I mean, that's something when I was working on high tunnels at Tennessee, we didn't do the raised beds. We just grew straight into the soil. So is that something you also have, Katie? Are yours in raised beds like Bronwyn's are?
Yeah, mine are raised beds as well. Ours is it a 20 by 48? Isn't that what it is, Nathan?
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. Yeah. So we have four raised beds in that setup that I have here at Murphysboro.
The high tunnel there in Murphysboro was laid out a little more for demonstration purposes. So there's some open space in it and it's not as jam-packed as like the one you see there in Bronwyn's picture, where it's, you know, that's more like grower oriented and how you would try to fill and strategically, you know, maximize every square foot. The one in Murphysboro is kind of more flexible and just to be kind of like a demo high tunnel. We did a few research projects in it, but just with that, we wanted to make sure we had room for a group of people to actually come inside. And so that's actually been good. We've had set up chairs in it in the front little corner and had people sit in there and done all kinds of workshops on, you know, from soil steaming or just general production, and all kinds of fun stuff is going on there. So
yeah, you know, I think I mentioned this in the webinar. It's been a couple of weeks since that was delivered, but you know, I think a couple of the reasons to go back to why in the tunnel that you see behind me, you know, why we set up those permanent beds, you know, and Nathan just mentioned, you know, one of the main reasons is to maximize the amount of your space in the tunnel and get as much square footage in production as possible. But the other reason for us as well is the native soil and the location where these high tunnels are at is pretty poor, really, really compacted, heavy clay. And so this allows us to amend that soil easier than if we were to try to continue to bring implements within the tunnel to work that ground. It's also hard to get you know, your tractor and equipment in there and get all the way from side to side in those tunnels. You're limited on the space that you can actually work with that tractor and equipment. And so this, you know, this just is more manageable for us. I think we see lots of growers that, you know, are on a good site with good native soil, and they're able to go in and not form up permanent raised beds, but you know, some of them are able to grow on flat ground in their tunnels, and some of them mound the soil up and kind of make, you know, raised beds in that capacity. So you know, that's the great thing about high tunnels is the versatility, and you know, each grower can kind of mold it to, you know, their production style, what fits their needs.
I mean, I think those raised beds, because I adapted basically a similar system to what had been done there at Dixon Springs for the Murphysboro High Tunnel. And I think, again, I think it allows a lot of ability then to kind of cram things in, and it depends somewhat on what you're growing. What we did was more like what you would say, kind of multi-purpose in that if you're doing tomatoes, you maybe would space them out a little more. And maybe if you're doing greens only, maybe you would even make the walkways a little narrower and the beds wider to maximize the space. But we kind of picked the middle of the road. So yeah, tomatoes are a little tight. Maybe you're losing maybe a little bit of some area that you could do for greens, things that are short, easy to reach over. Don't make you claustrophobic in the middle of summer. But yeah, it keeps things orderly. There you mentioned the equipment. You're all using like basically a small hand tiller, and you can get in there. You don't have to get in there with a tractor. And yeah, you can't get into corners. And now, like for you guys, you have the walkways dedicated that are kind of solid. So to the point, I think you had in this picture you backfilled some of them with sand. But even in the other tunnel, once those are kind of established, then they're tend to be not as muddy. There's exceptions to that, but it is otherwise if you're working the whole thing and then you have then it's just even traversing in the tunnel and stuff can be I don't know, I say impossible, just more challenging. It's just that system fit for us as far as, and I liked what Dixon Springs, what they had, and they had, and I don't know, I think it does serve its purpose. And a lot of utility, like even for, you can see there's some of the treatments for this, or it could be for tomatoes, you want black plastic on it, you can take and you can put a piece of plastic over it, staple it on, and you got black plastic. So it's easy to, fill the bed, level it off on the top, so you have good, like, plastic to soil connection and stuff, for, heat transfer and warming. So not to mention is with the raised beds versus flat. So remember, if the high tunnel air temperatures are say 70 degrees on a cold winter day, you have 70 degrees on 3 sides of that bed, versus on flat soil, you have the mass of, all the frozen ground outside. And so trying to drive those soil temperatures up can be a little bit harder whenever you don't have everything, you don't have a raised bed and have some of that, that warm air kind of helping to warm the sides. I mean, you're still not, getting monumental differences. I mean, it's still, cooler soils in the winter, but I think it is something to take note of as far as how some of those benefits. So.
And Nathan brought up talking about your steamer and stuff. Do you think, because I know you've used that steamer in other situations, do you think that the raised bed system makes it easier to use that steamer? Do you feel like you have better control with it?
Yes, we did a little bit of work on a grower's farm. It's been several years ago, and they were on just flat ground, and it was really hard to see that steam penetrate. It was not really very effective in the flat ground situation. I think for a steaming situation with what we have, the raised bed is beneficial because it's, that soil is looser, a little bit less compacted than on the flat ground can be. Even if you've worked it tends to just be a little bit looser, also depending on the amendments that you've put in that raised bed. And also we found that if you can have those raised beds moistened, then that allows that steam to transfer through and penetrate deeper into the soil. If you're steaming onto dry ground, onto dry soil, it's really hard to get that heat transfer down to the depth that you want. But being able, so that's another benefit with these raised beds, that we have their drip irrigation, and we can go ahead and moisten those beds up before we start that steaming process, and then it makes it go quicker, it's more effective, and it goes deeper into the soil.
Because the steamer is for controlling diseases and pathogens and weeds, or is it for something else?
It's mainly for that. Yeah, we're looking to not sterilize the soil, but pasteurize the soil, and so we are able to control a lot of the weeds. Some of your harder seed coats are will still have some skips in there. The steam still does not control nut sedge. That can still be a problem. and we are able to have a little bit of an effect on some soil-borne diseases as well. We mainly use it every year. I think for us, it's a good way for us to manage weeds. We are very, very rarely ever walking through and having to pull weeds or hoe. There you have an occasional skip. I mean, I know it's horrible for us. So yeah, we're very fortunate that that piece of equipment is here on site and we're able to utilize it.
That's one thing, you know, they also, we had brought the steamer up into Murphysboro and done some there. I don't know when the last time, Katie, you had up there. We had gone, even if you weren't bringing in a lot of, say, dirty soil or something that had a lot of weed seeds in between to amend, we would try, if we needed to backfill beds, we would try to do that and then steam, you know, plant something after that. Or if not, try to have a good quality compost that, you know, shouldn't be laden with lots of weeds. But we would go, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, and we still had very good weed control, especially in the beds, as far as, you know, the ability. And that's if you keep it under control and don't let it get out of hand and get a whole bunch of weed seed production. If you keep it, you know, keep roguing out those weeds, you know, it isn't, it wouldn't even have to be an annual event, I think, to see really big impacts. I would say, if depending on your management, if you can keep weeds from coming in, either self-producing seed or weed seeds blowing in, I think even every 3 to 5 years, you could, you know, get away with, you know, doing that and seeing a tangible benefit, especially with like the greens and stuff, not having the henbit and chickweed to fight with, trying to pull them out. I mean, tomatoes is one thing. I mean, you can deal with a lot of weeds, but or to find other ways to get around it. But yeah, no, the weed control thing is huge. Carrots, that's another one. I hate trying to weed carrots. As an aside to that, we also did a couple years, we did some solarization, and that I think also could be effective, but the timing on that can be tricky because a lot of times you really need to do some of that during the summer. And so that's, so then, you know, you're probably using the high tunnel for maybe you have tomatoes or something in. So, but we actually did that. It wasn't super early. We had some annual ryegrass in the tunnel at Murphysboro, and maybe some clover in it. We actually terminated that in a bed just by solarizing it. I think we were able to get it dead by, I don't know, late April, just with a piece of clear plastic over it, and then in the high tunnel with it, you know, staying fairly warm. And so, so that's another aspect that I think, between the steam, which obviously not everyone will have access to, but the solarization, almost anyone, especially if you have a spare piece of plastic, you can cover those beds and you can, you know, heat it up with just the sun's energy. And so we were able just to kill a very vigorous annual ryegrass. I mean, it was like a lawn. It was like 6-8 inches tall. We just laid the plastic down over it and, you know, basically baked it. We got a couple of warm days. I think I would even say 1 or 2 really good warm days can do it in. And then we just planted transplants right into that. We didn't do anything to the beds. So.
Yeah, you're right. It's the timing with that. I mean, for us in the north, it's just not, especially if you were like, you know, ending a season or trying to end a season, the timing won't work. But I think you're right. If you were trying to maybe even midsummer, maybe get something, and maybe, I know that some studies have looked at black or clear plastic, or which is better, and it tends to be clear, and it tends to also just be a single layer. If it's a double layer, it's so hot it ends up melting on top of another.
Yeah, I've always, for solarization, I think clear plastic has always been my choice. It's, you know, what I was always had told was that it's kind of the greenhouse effect, that the clear actually lets that heat through, rather than just the black, that, you know, the black itself gets hot and is good for, say, early season where we want to kind of warm the soil, but it doesn't get it that extra step to really, you know, where you get the killing effect of, you know, hitting at that kind of pasteurization point where you're trying to kill out some of those weed seeds and stuff. And so no, I think, yeah, I think it's certainly another area to explore, And every system's different as far as when you can get it, but maybe even, if you had like an early season crop that was, say, pretty well done, maybe late summer, early fall, I think you could maybe, if you're trying to suppress some weeds, you could probably even get in some good solarizing days, especially, outside is different, but in a high tunnel, you can already build the temperatures up. You put, plastic inside a high tunnel, and especially if you get some warm fall days, I think even just a few days can do some pretty substantial benefits. So
Yeah, I've done it with oats, and in the high tunnel the last 2 years, I think we did oats, and we would solarize them, and we just direct transplanted tomatoes into it. And I think the key for us to really like get it to work is making sure that you have it sealed all the way around, that you're holding that hot air in there, and that there's no air escaping. Like we had a place that had a hole in the plastic, and that never did die because it just had enough. Yeah, it survived at a lifeline. But so I think that that's important, and it does work down here, but we are pretty far south too. So.
And I know, like, when they talk about solarization, they there's concern about soil biology or anything like that. And really what we find is it may affect it temporarily, but it's not going to like substantially like kill off your entire community. It's going to bounce back, especially once you put a crop in there with a good root zone, you're going to be fine. The recovery will happen.
Yeah, I think that's always been kind of my assumption, even through any of the agricultural systems where there's things, that inputs we know, well, that could have an effect, but the rebound on those populations is certainly really, really rapid. And one thing, although the steam can be a little bit harder to control, certainly with the solarization, you're kind of at the mercy of the sun. You don't have, it's not like you have a thermostat, you can just turn it, unless you're watching the temperatures and lifting the plastic, if it gets over, 130 or 120 under there. But it's, obviously it's you don't need to just hit that temperature, you need to also maintain it for a certain period of time. So it's, so certainly there's pros and cons, but I agree. Everything I've always read is, we get really quick rebounds from soil biology, and you might be, maybe affecting the top, maybe, I don't know, anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 6 inches, but then anything deeper in the soil and other stuff is, just replenishes that, very rapidly. So
Yeah, that is what I like about our steamer is our ability to control and maintain the heat when we're applying. We have our steam sock out, and we drape that with a heavy black plastic, and we have thermometers, and we can put those down through the bed and watch. And once we hit about that 130-ish, 140 range, and then we can hold it there. I think anecdotally they used to stick a potato in the soil, and we'd let it run for about an hour and then pull it out, and you'd have this perfectly done baked potato. It's amazing how it corresponded with when you watch the thermometer, and well, we've hit about 140 and we're holding, and so we kind of, you bury that potato down, so you kind of get an idea that steam was able to penetrate about 4 or 5 inches down, and we're good to go. So
do you eat that potato that evening, Bronwyn, or what do you?
It depended on what kind of day. If I hadn't had time to make supper, then that was going to be there. Yeah.
Actually, I don't remember when, but I'm pretty sure we did throw a potato under one at Murphysboro at some point.
I think we did.
I'm pretty sure we did.
I thought we did that last time. Well, yeah, the last time we drove it up there to your
I think we did.
We've talked a lot about the use of plastic, and I think in high tunnel production and in just general weed management in the field, plastic is used pretty commonly for these systems to work. And we recognize it's a balance, right? Where you're wanting to, you're balancing out labor, you're balancing out kind of general farm management on a daily basis with it. And I know in our chat box too, we got a lot of questions about what are the alternatives to black plastic. What do you all think of what's out there, I guess? But then also, what are some options that folks might want to consider if they are wanting to reduce the plastic use.
In the chat box questions, were those questions, was it general use of black plastic inside and in outdoor production as well as in high tunnels, or was it specifically directed at the plastic that I was using in the tunnel in the Winter Greens project?
It was kind of both. I think it is just people that, they want to not use as much black plastic to create their rows. And then, what alternatives might there be?
Well, I think within the tunnel, I think that you could use weed mat as opposed to, this black plastic that could end up being something that you could reuse, and definitely serves multiple purposes. A little bit of soil heating, but I think mainly helping you with weed management in those situations. And I think if you've got whether you're growing on flat ground in your tunnel or you're making mounds, soil ridges as opposed to permanent raised beds like I have, that weed mat can really kind of mold to the shape of the ground, and provide you weed control not just next to the plant but also in your walk aisles. And I have seen growers that have those measured out and mark their holes, and after that season is over they can roll that up and store it and then be able to utilize it again. And so I think that's a great way to be able to reuse that product and get as much life out of it as possible. And when we think about outside production, it makes me think about Nathan has been doing quite a bit of work with no-till vegetable production and incorporating some of those, utilizing cover crops as a mulching type material. And I think he's had 2 years of research on a really good project looking at tomato and pepper production in this system and comparing it to black plastic. And I think you've seen some pretty good results from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in those cases, especially where we're talking on our main season crops, where maybe the heating and the early aspect isn't maybe as prevalent, we're able to utilize those systems and and get very comparable yields that can hold up against even some of our plastic culture systems, which especially for tomatoes, tomatoes thrive in some of those systems. So I think that's another opportunity. And I always encourage people. We did a few kind of off the cuff kind of calculations and figuring, just how many dollars just in materials per acre are you using for plastic, and that doesn't account for all the labor and some of those things which are kind of hard to calculate because the added time, say added tillage passes to adequately prepare a field, to do a nice job laying plastic. Then the disposal of the plastic. There are some programs that you can actually recycle black plastic from agricultural production. However, if you're don't have a large enough volume, and then there's certainly logistics and things that go into play that disposal and besides purchasing it, disposal can be certainly something very significant. Although it's a great tool. It's I think all of these, they come with some kind of a cost to manage and utilize. But I think, in a high tunnel, from your research, Bronwyn, didn't you pretty well determine that for the greens, as far as production wise, there wasn't a huge benefit, was there, for most of these? Is that what I remember?
Yeah. When I was utilizing some data loggers to record soil temperatures, in comparing plots that were on bare ground versus those covered in plastic, I really did not see a large difference in soil temperature between those two systems. The black plastic, I didn't really see a lot of increase in soil temperature heat wise. So I don't think we saw a benefit from using black plastic in this situation. I think where we saw a greater benefit with the plastic was, again, on the cleanliness during harvest. Just being, so in that instance, any type of material that you could use as a barrier between your greens and the soil is going to help you, have a cleaner product. And so that goes back to thinking about the weed mat again, maybe even putting some straw down. If you've got, if you're just on bare ground, flat ground, or those raised beds, using straw, that may be something that you can incorporate in and add organic material into your growing area as well.
I also think you could use, like we mentioned, you can use some of the cover crop aspects too to provide some baseline residue, especially for any of your transplanted crops. Direct seeded things is, I wouldn't say it certainly is possible, but it can be a little more challenging. And especially the larger transplants, tomatoes and peppers and things may make a little more sense than the greens, where you're planting a lot more plants. And so having that soil nice and loose when you're doing this by hand, because I don't know, I'm just glancing at the picture and thinking about it, in that picture, for every one tomato plant you might put out in a foot of bed, what you may have, I don't know, 8-12 greens plants you're planting. So you're talking a lot more plants per bed foot that you're planting by hand. Doing tomato transplants one every couple feet, in a no-till or in a limited till, it's a little more solid. That may not be so bad. When you're doing, maybe, I don't know, 10 times that many in that same area, then that may slow you. That little extra time to plant those may add up a lot more. But I think there's some opportunities. And it's just good this project to me was just interesting to know, especially in our high tunnels, over winter in this situation, does that plastic, is it necessary, especially for the heat and to really push the yield? So.
Well, and I would say back to the plastic and the transplanting and like the ease or difficulty in comparison to a no-till system. I'm trying to remember, but in our high tunnel here, when I had the oat cover crop in, we transplanted some smaller greens and herbs into it. And I would say time-wise, it wasn't a whole lot different than making sure that you got the holes poked in the plastic and made sure that the plant was actually in the soil. So like in comparing of two different ground covers, the black plastic soil was tilled, but we still had to go to the extra step of going through the plastic and actually making sure that we had the plant in the ground, where, it would be a similar situation, I think, depending on what you're planting. Because some of those plants are pretty small too. And so that makes a difference.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. It's like matching up what you're growing with what you might decide to use. I know there has been newer biodegradable mulches on the market in the last couple of years, and I will say, as someone that did research on biodegradable mulches 10 years ago, back when Katie was, in kindergarten, they have gone leaps and bounds than what they were 10 years ago. And so folks can find them, but just recognize they can be a little more expensive sometimes than what you might be used to. And you may not always like how they biodegrade down or break down in the soil either.
Yeah, I was in junior high.
Yeah, I think those biodegradable products, especially for field production, where you where you can not have for disposal purposes, I think that has a lot of fit, and somewhat in the high tunnel. Although I always remind myself, in a high tunnel, we can take such a small amount and get so much because we pull such high yield, say, per square foot in this intensive production, that disposing of say a tunnel like in Bronwyn's picture, the plastic of that versus disposing of an acre's worth of black plastic is like a whole different ball game, and the amount. And that's so, I mean, if anything, if you really think of logistics, if you're using more intensive production, you're getting more bang for your buck out of the dollar you're investing, in that product, compared, maybe in a field scale or something. So still always got to put it in perspective, I guess. So.
And two, with this system, while you do need the plastic and a stapler to hold it to the sides of the beds, you're not using, you know, a large tiller making multiple passes with a tractor. You don't actually need a bed shaper and plastic layer and all of that other more intense kind of things. Like you could do this system by yourself essentially, and not need specialized equipment. And so that's something too to think about, although that you do lose something in man hours. But it
So
just
you
kinda
need a
depends.
strong back
Yeah.
or an
Yeah.
intern with a strong back. Katie.
Yeah, I think that's something like, especially like the research that you're doing, Bronwyn, and how your high tunnel, Katie, is how it's set up. It's like it seems more approachable sometimes than how we tend to talk about high tunnels. We tend to talk about high tunnels like, well, you can get a tractor in there, and it's, you know, and so as someone who maybe is thinking of getting a high tunnel, they're thinking, oh my gosh, now I need a tractor, now I need all this additional equipment just to put this structure in and utilize. And both of you all have examples of like, you don't need that.
No, I mean, I don't even know the last time that we had a tractor and implement inside the tunnel. You know, Nathan mentioned we use really the small, very small tillers, not even, I mean, even smaller than, you know, we used to have the old Troy built like 8 horsepower rear tine, but that's too wide for our beds. So, I mean, we have a small,
It's like a little,
it's
like a
like
mantis
like
or
an
something.
18-inch. Yeah, there are lots of different brands of those, but you know, we can go in and let those work, and they'll go down to the depth, you know, or maybe just a little bit below the top, the height of our boards that we have, that we utilize for those raised beds, and so that's what we go in with. Yeah, there's been no tractor or large equipment work in these tunnels for several years. Now, do we need a tractor? Maybe for outside work, maybe moving soil amendments, composts, you know, to the ends, that we can then wheelbarrow in. Yeah, that's always convenient, but as far as actual utilization within the tunnel itself, no, we don't have any large scale equipment at all for that.
And all of the tunnels at Dixon Springs are all single wall, right? And single layer plastic. Because I know some of the more high tunnels that sometimes have supplemental heat and things down here have double layer, but none of yours are, right? Because I know mine's not.
No, none of these currently have a double wall. I think the one that we're looking at in the picture behind me, I think at one time that one actually did have a double layer of plastic on it. At that time, that tunnel was utilized for research in raspberry production, as well as looking at some vertical stack system with different strawberries, and I think there were some greens, different types of greens in those vertical stacks as well. So it was, that tunnel looked, what was growing in there, and it looked completely different.
Yeah, it looked a little different than this. So.
Yeah, you know, I think, and that's a testament to the diversity of a high tunnel. But no, we currently do not have double wall right now. But because, again, as I mentioned, diversity, we could very easily add another layer of plastic on there and put a blower in and be able to, you know, create that airspace to insulate and you know, help add additional heat there in the wintertime, or not add, but hold heat in during the wintertime.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I don't, you know, we have high tunnels up north here, and I don't think we have many, if any at all, that have the double layer on it, even though it would make quite a lot of sense to actually to do that. We just don't see it.
So one of the things like that I always remember, because I do remember that, you know, when that tunnel had a double layer on it, and that's the benefits is, you know, obviously the insulating factor, you have that airspace between the plastic. And so so that gives, so, you know, the inside air, that nice warm air that comes up to the top of that tunnel, you know, it hits against basically insulated layer rather than the layer that might be 20 degrees or 10 degrees or whatever it is outside. So that effect. But another sideline that I remember being told about was even when it comes to like wind and stuff, that with that inflated, that plastic doesn't wear as much because it doesn't flap around in the wind. If it has a little bit of, no matter how hard you try, there's a little slack, and then the windy, you're getting a little bit of flap, and that's going to cause wear. The other thing was that if you would get an incidence of hail, you'll actually, with that kind of that pillowed effect, you'll get almost more of a bouncing effect. I mean, obviously large enough hail, it's still plastic, so it's not invincible, but you can actually get to where you would have, potential of less damage, during a hail event versus a single layer that's just pushed down. That hail is either it's going to hit, and at a certain point it's either going to, it's going to bounce off, or it's just going to fly right through because there's not as much give to it. So those are just some other random things that you maybe wouldn't think of at first about the benefit of having that double layer.
As a bit of an aside, Tennessee with their high tunnel research, it always tended to coincided with a field day in April. And this is back to your point of hail, because for 2 years in a row, there was a hailstorm days before the field day. And after that, they now started doing a field day in the fall because they had all the high tunnels were hit by hail. And these were single layers, so the double layer might have helped, but certainly it made us a little bit more mindful of when we should hold a field day.
Maybe just fall was better in that case.
Fall I think is a better time. Yeah.
But yeah, that is, I think if that becomes an issue, I think even just general wind wear and stuff, the double layer just is more robust. And you wouldn't think until you see it and you start thinking about it, and it does provide a lot. Just that extra layer of plastic in that air provides a lot of kind of indirect benefits, especially if you're more intense, especially in like the winter months and things, and really trying to capture heat. I think there's certainly something to it. And the nice thing, as Bronwyn mentioned, high tunnel, the versatility is that most tunnels you have the room, the space that you can add in another layer. It's not and adding the fan to it and stuff it's not a terribly difficult thing to do. I even contemplated on your tunnel, Katie, but it never came to fruition. But that was just because we got tired of just the noisy plastic on windy days. But
maybe next time, because I think we're probably getting close to needing a new top at some point. So I've considered it as well, just because it would be something new to try, and we hear a lot about it, but I've never tried it firsthand, and so I would be really interested to see how it turns out. You all have to come help me.
Yeah, we've also actually in the last couple of weeks been discussing thinking about on at least one of these tunnels putting a second layer on, just again so that we do have that comparison. That's kind of the neat thing about the 3 tunnels at Dixon Springs is they're all pre-made by a different manufacturer, and they all have different aspects of them. And so just them sitting there, they're kind of a living demonstration of what different types of inputs you can have on your high tunnel. As an example, you look in the picture behind me, you can see the trusses running across the bows, like right there. Okay. One of our other tunnels does not have trussing at all. And so, the trussing adds a lot more structural integrity, and it also allows you to, if we wanted to grow tomatoes or cucumbers, indeterminate tomatoes or cucumbers in this tunnel, we could, hang the weight off of these trusses, and it would be able to withstand that and not have to build a separate trellis system within the tunnel. The tunnel that has no trussing in it, we're a little bit limited on the crops that we can grow in that. And so, if you're thinking about considering purchasing a high tunnel, obviously cost is always going to be on the forefront of your mind. What can I afford to do? If you can if you can afford to do it, I think the more you can, the more inputs you can have on your tunnel to allow for you to diversify your cropping systems, I think you'll be ahead in the long run. You know, is it more expensive to have trusses put in? Yes, it is. But you can, you know, you have, you know, we could hanging baskets in here as well if we wanted to do that. So it really expands what you can grow on them.
Another thought that this is something related to Katie, you can relate to a little bit, is that, you know, also consider if you're thinking about trellising things or even hang things, think of the height. You know, the high tunnel Katie has 4-foot sidewalls. If you wanted to hang anything, or especially if you want to trellis tomatoes, cucumbers works fine. You know, I'd put at least a 6-foot sidewall, because what we found in that tunnel, although it works fine, you know, it's easy, you know, I can reach, you know, a lot of things, you know, with having that 4-foot sidewall, but we couldn't grow a tomato and doing like a single leader system for an indeterminate tomato where we're lowering it. We couldn't get the bottom fruit harvested before it grew to the top, and we need to lower it because we just didn't have enough length. I don't know, I'm guessing it takes maybe closer to 8 feet of space, or maybe a little more than that, to get that fruiting zone for most of our indeterminates. So we always struggled. We did a few like that, but we would inevitably, they'd be growing up above where we lower them, and we had fruit that were down at the bottom we hadn't harvested yet, so we didn't want to really lower them and put those on the ground. So cucumbers worked just fine. We did all kinds of cucumbers, and they fruit in a compact enough zone or fast enough that in, say, what we have, maybe, I'm guessing like maybe 7 feet or so, Katie, in that high tunnel, maybe floor to ceiling for the trellising. You know, we could easily get harvest everything, lower them, and, you know, just be at the top of that bar and ready to go. So just another aside and experience with those tunnels, and thinking, oh, we can grow tomatoes in here, we can put at least some trellising, and well, no, the tomatoes just don't work well. I certainly wouldn't want to do a whole tunnel like that. And also in that one, we only trellised in the center beds because the outside ones weren't high enough to really trellis up like that. So
Yeah. And yeah, I would agree completely with that. And as much as I was saying I was traumatized by the cucumbers earlier, they do very well in a high tunnel system, and with that single leader you know, drop down. And in the lower tunnels they work well. And I've tried tomatoes too, and they don't like it. The indeterminates don't like that shorter ceiling. It doesn't seem like, because like you said, your fruiting zone's too spread out, that you just run out of space. And what we have done with cherry tomatoes is let them get up taller and then kind of let them drop back down. And that's not, that wouldn't work in any kind of production system, but for demonstration, and we were more showing the actual variety of that tomato. And I would say too that it's important to keep in mind with any tunnel, but especially the shorter ones, the airflow, how you place things within the tunnel to block that you might be blocking airflow through. It works out well for us that our taller things are trellised in the center, but you do want to be conscious of that, if you're going to have tall things on the edges, that it might block some of the airflow, just for ventilation purposes.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, is if someone is kind of getting started in high tunnels, like figuring out sometimes what the crop is going to be as they're deciding on the high tunnel, maybe a good route to go, just as both you and Nathan and shared. You know, if the goal was indeterminate tomatoes, that high tunnel was maybe not going to work for you. And the same, I guess, can be said for a lot of other crops too, as has been mentioned today too. From a northern perspective, I mean, I think there's a bit of an experimentation happening with the high tunnels. As much as some folks are still kind of growing whatever they would have grown in the field, they're growing in high tunnels. We're seeing a lot of folks try Asian pears in high tunnels to get some protection. They're looking at dwarf peach trees under high tunnels. So almost like that idea of Bronwyn, as you mentioned, like anything that can go in it, try it out and see. And that's what we're really trying to kind of push, is experimenting with them, because, you know, there's no snow on the ground today, but there will be snow on the ground still this spring. And for our northern growers, we have to figure that out.
And do some of your northern growers almost do they utilize a low tunnel within their high tunnel if they're going to be growing through, winter time? I would think with your temperatures as cold as they get, that, you may be able to overwinter some things that you wouldn't normally consider, basically creating a tunnel within a tunnel. Do you see that in your area?
We do see that. I think if they have any kind of winter CSAs or kind of winter markets where, they're able to sell into like Chicago or other places, I think it could work really well. I think the missing piece, which I think, your tunnel exhibits as well as Katie's, is like, we're growing straight into the ground. We're not creating those raised beds. And the raised beds could actually be like another piece of northern high tunnel production that could really change that entire system. Like it could really allow for the ability for additional crops perhaps to grow that wouldn't have been able to.
Yeah, no, I think, raised beds, maybe even that double layer of plastic, and, I think some of those things are, I think, can definitely go a long ways. I know I've heard about all kinds of other projects, even, sweet cherries and other things, and some of the brambles, which I know we've, even Bronwyn and I have talked about. And the biggest thing, and I think anything is potentially possible, but, I always like to go back to one of, kind of, I guess you'd say, our mentors of sorts that always just stressed the value of the square foot in that tunnel. You have this is prime real estate, he would say, and you need to be maximizing. And Bronwyn, you might remember what Jeff, the threshold he had, he had a kind of a dollar per kind of, I don't know if it was square foot or per, I think it was per 30 by 96 foot tunnel that was a good export that you could actually justify, because there's things that are novel that we can do, but then if you're really doing this on like a commercial scale for market and for more than just a novelty, is it really making financial sense? You have this structure here, if you're really trying to make a business model out of this, is this really worth it? Because if you can fit only so many trees in it and you get so much yield, is that worthwhile, especially if they're in there permanently and you can do nothing else in that tunnel. Now, if you can think of ways to intercrop or do maybe an in-tunnel permaculture kind of setting, then that's, then I'm all for that. It's just, and I'm really up to anything, but it's just always encourage people to think about that perspective of it. Because I'm guilty of this too. The horticulturist inside me that wants to grow some of these crazy things that don't do super well outside or marginal, say, oh, we could do better in a high tunnel. And then you realize when you start thinking about it, it's like, well, then the tunnel is just kind of stuck with, some of these perennial, you're kind of confined to that and you can't do a lot else with it. And then you just kind of have that money just sticking in that for a one crop that's maybe you harvest for 2 weeks. And then other than that, it's just there. So
and that might be where if you had the means to invest in the movable tunnels, where you could you have a perennial crop in one section, but you can move it down the track to another area and be able to capitalize on the benefits of high tunnels in two or three different zones. That may be a model to look at for some folks.
Yeah, especially with some of like the perennials or cherries, a lot of those times you really only need, some of the main benefits are only coming for a short period of time in the spring. The problem is you may really need that tunnel in 3 different spots at that time. Which of the 3 places do you, or 2, whatever movable positions you have, where does it get priority at? But I know, for something like cherries, a lot of the benefit maybe isn't the earliness, but for us, it was rainfall control, because we get such horrible cracking during harvest. So, harvest is, I don't know, maybe late May, June. Could you, by that time with your tomatoes, maybe be able to live without the tunnel, that you could move it? There's a little extra layer of strategy. Otherwise, you get stuck in it's going to get cold, or I want this here, this needs to be covered, and this needs to be covered at the same moment. And then you're trying to kind of choose who trumps who, and then sometimes, maybe all the effort you invested in the crop that didn't get the tunnel then is just lost for that season or whatever it may be. So
I think it's a great idea. Yeah, I mean, like being able to provide some winter protection for something and then move it to the next one. At least that would be how we might do it up north, is like, okay, we have protected our precious peach trees for the season from the outside temperatures, and now we have the ability to move it ahead to different ones.
So Bronwyn, what is your plan for the future with these tunnels?
As far as looking at winter greens, I think I've always been a fan of variety trials. Doesn't matter what the crop is. Done a lot of work with tomato and pepper varieties, cucumber varieties, and we ended up changing varieties on the spinach and the kale, and also the carrots between year 1 and year 2 of this research project. And I think that there is, again, in all of those crops, there are so many different varieties. I think looking at a variety trial would be good. What's performing well, what doesn't, doing some yield comparisons, quality comparisons. That would definitely be something to look at. And I think we can, we've kind of shown from this project that, our spinach and our kale, those crops really, at least for us here in Southern Illinois, really do well, bounce back even on really cold temperatures, whether we've been able to have a row cover on them or not. Our lettuces, they're a little bit more fragile, a little bit more sensitive to the really cold temperatures. And so, a little bit more, row cover management project on some lettuces, that may be something that we look at. I don't know that I need to go back and look at anything with the black plastic, just because we didn't see that, any significant difference in yields comparing black plastic to the bare ground in this situation. So I don't think I need to go back with that, but I think a little bit of row cover management, variety trials, I think that would be fun, and also maybe exploring some of the other crops, some of the different Chinese vegetables, the bok choy and tatsoi and some things like that. Plus, I enjoy eating those, and so it'd be nice to have those through the winter. So,
what about your high tunnel research, Katie? What's the future of high tunnel research for your high tunnel?
So,
yes, Katie, what is that future?
So this summer, I actually got, this was not my idea, so I can't take credit for it, but I got pulled into doing, because we have a high tunnel down here. I think this is the furthest south, other than Bronwyn Tunnel, that we're doing it. But Chris Enroth asked me to participate in their ginger variety trial. So we're going to grow baby ginger, and we're going to do it in the high tunnel. And then also we're getting a caterpillar tunnel to put out and do it out there as well. The biggest concern, especially down here, is that while ginger is a tropical crop, it likes steady humid temperatures and not, scorching 900 degrees in the summertime and then and then very cold in the spring. And so we will be using the high tunnel, but then also incorporating our shade cloth that we have for our high tunnel that we use anyway, but then also putting a shade cloth on the caterpillar tunnel to try to keep the temperature from getting too high. Then we also, with that, so that will take up probably 2 beds in the tunnel, and then the other 2 will be probably dedicated to some different demonstration stuff. We always do like to put some cut flowers in our high tunnel too. And then we use ours because it's a little bit smaller. We do some research trials in there. The ginger will probably be the main trial in the high tunnel this summer, but then we have people come in and out and do just demonstration work. So I do like having a lot of different things, so that way we can kind of showcase different techniques and ideas and things for people who stop by. So those are the big things for this summer.
Very nice. And Nathan and I don't have high tunnels, so we don't have to worry about it. So
No.
Well, you guys are welcome to visit ours anytime.
All right. Well, thank you, Bronwyn, for being with us today. And thank you again to Katie and Nathan for being here today as well. You will find Bronwyn's presentation on the Illinois Extension Local Foods Small Farms YouTube channel, or by visiting go.illinois.edu/SFWW2022 YouTube. Thank you again for joining us on this Deeper Dig episode, and we hope to see you again for other episodes in the future.